Welcome to Steel Stories by US Steel. In this podcast, we explore the wealth of knowledge from leading industry experts to help you navigate the infinitely developing, renewable world of steel.
All right, welcome to another episode of Steel Stories presented by US Steel. Today we have a very special episode. My name is Ben Trotter, Director of Marketing with US Steel. Very special guest, Gerry Dulac from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Gerry, welcome.
Well, Ben, thank you. Glad to be here. You know, this is kind of my summer home for 3 weeks, and it's nice to have this little diversion and talk to you.
I appreciate it very much. So, Gerry, you have very deep roots in the Mon Valley region, and we want to talk to you a little bit today about some of the history between US Steel, the Steelers, and the connection with Mon Valley. So, tell me a little bit about your background and your history with the US Steel.
Well, I will tell you that my dad's family, he grew up in Glassport. My mom grew up in Portview. My dad's family, they worked in the mill. His brother and sister. My dad didn't, but my brother actually worked there in the summers while he was going to law school. My old girlfriend way back when, she worked there in the summer. Her dad was a foreman, and we lived not far, 2-3 miles from National Steel, National Tube. And so, that was my history. And, McKeesport was a thriving area at that point. They actually had a downtown where people came there to shop, whether it was Immel's or Kadar, G.C. Murphy's, which is where my mom worked back when she was younger. Those were thriving stores. And then when the steel industry started to collapse into, I guess, with the mid to late 80s, whenever that was, then, of course, those, unfortunately and sadly, the town started to erode. But at one point, it was a thriving little metropolis, if you will. And I worked at the McKeesport Daily News. And at the time, McKeesport Daily News was the largest of the suburban papers. There were other suburban papers in Beaver County, Greensburg, up in Vandergrift, Katanning. And compared to the McKeesport Daily News, it was the biggest paper. They had a 50,000 circulation at the time. And by comparison, the Post-Gazette now on a Sunday, with the advent of the web and everything else, the Post-Gazette only prints on Sunday, which at one point when I was at the press had over 400,000 circulation. They now print about 50,000 papers, which is what we printed at the Daily News. But that just goes to show how the town and the Times were thriving at that point in conjunction with the steel industry in the Mon Valley.
And that's great. I appreciate that information and that history, because a lot of that I didn't know. So it's very informative to me. When I think about the Steelers and I think about the history of the Mon Valley and the Steel City, there was a connection in the early years of the team between toughness and steel that kind of built up the culture of the team. How do you think that shaped some of the organization? And do you still feel like that those roots are part of this organization today?
I don't think there's any question. I get a kick out of people still talk about Pittsburgh as a blue-collar city, but they're talking about what has been instilled in the people here. But as we all know, it's become white-collar, with education and medicine and technology. But going way back, if you look at the Steelers' first logo, it was a steel worker, or at least wearing the hat, and he was on a steel girder punting a football. That was their first logo. Mm-hmm. And so their connection goes way back, and they haven't gotten away from that all the way up to the symbol on their helmet, which of course they only put it on one side, which is distinctive enough. But that logo hasn't changed in all these years. So there's no question their connection to the steel industry, even though, again, the way the city has changed a little bit, going from blue collar to white collar, they still embrace the whole steel image.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that very much. And yeah, there's a lot of history behind the logo and the AISI and all that history, and it all kind of connects and comes together with the Steelers, with US Steel. So we appreciate that information. Everybody loves a good story. Can you talk about the steel curtain and how the steel curtain might have got its name?
Ben, we don't have enough time to tell stories that I know about the steel curtain. But what I will tell you, I was a young kid in the business, again, working at McKeesport, to show you how far back I go. When people say, how many training camps have you been to? I go, look, I don't count them, because I've been to training camps on and off going back to 1979, because I was at their 4th Super Bowl that they won in the Rose Bowl in Pasadena. So that's how long I've been in the business associated with the Steelers. Now, on a regular basis, it's probably been since 92, Bill Cowher's first year, where I was around them all the time and traveled with them. But to your question, so as a young kid in the business, I grew up a Steeler fan. And then, when you start covering them and you learn very quickly, even though it's still there, you kind of have to get rid of that fandom, if you will. But being around Joe Green and Fats Holmes, Ernie Holmes was maybe my favorite player before I started covering. And then I'm not allowed to have favorite players.
Sure.
But L.C. Greenwood, Dwight White, that front four was as dominating as there was probably in the history of the league. And all you have to do is look at that first Super Bowl when they beat the Minnesota Vikings. I think they held them to like 27 yards total. L.C. Greenwood just harassed Fran Tarkenton. You go to the 1976 team, which was probably their best team. It's the one that didn't win a Super Bowl. Their first playoff game, they went to Baltimore and they just annihilated the Baltimore Colts about 40-14. People who remember that game also for the plane crashing in the upper deck at Memorial Stadium after the stands had emptied and the field was cleared. But that defense, the final 9 games of the year, I think they had 6 shutouts and allowed 23 points in the final 9 games. That's how good that Steel Curtain defense was, and it all started up front. But it was the players behind it too. They had so many of those guys, as we know, ended up in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Joe Green, Jack Ham, Jack Lambert, Mel Blount, and so it was a star-studded team, and they just dominated, if not terrorized, the National Football League.
Yeah. No, I've seen the highlights. It was a little bit before my time, but I've been seeing the highlights for many years and heard many stories, watched a lot of the Super Bowls and old tapes, and it was obviously very fun to watch.
No question.
Switching gears for a little bit, let's talk a little bit about training camp. You've been coming here for many years.
Long time.
You said 1979, I think you said. What's one thing you look forward to when you come each year, coming back to Latrobe?
Well, it's changed for me for this reason, because for the last however many years, I also do radio and I also do TV. So it becomes very busy for me. And I actually enjoy at night, even though I still do my work for the paper, then at night I go do radio 2 or 3 nights a week. And it's one was a challenge at first, and 2, it's become a nice diversion. And I enjoy it because a lot of the fans go to the restaurant after the game, and I get as much questions from the fans just there as I do talking on the radio itself. Mm-hmm. So that has made training camp a little bit more appealing to me. I won't lie to you. I sneak over to Latrobe Country Club every now and then and play a little golf. That's therapy for me. But, like this year in particular, everybody wants to come, but even I, who've been to as many camps and seen a lot of great players, when a 4-time MVP like Aaron Rodgers comes to your team, you can't help but want to come see him. If you're a fan, you can't help but be excited about him being on this team. And after all the moves they made in the offseason, bringing in star players, whether Jalen Ramsey, Jonnu Smith, making that trade, signing Darius Slay, again, Aaron Rodgers, DK Metcalf, giving them the biggest contract they've ever given a player that they traded for. They've made big moves to commit to this team right now, this season. And so coming to training camp this year, that's as intriguing and as curious and as exciting, really, as it's going to get. And even the 2 previous years, they made a ton of changes. Nothing like this.
Yeah. Oh, 2 years ago, there was a lot of changes. This year was even more so obviously significant. So you mentioned Latrobe Country Club, and when I think of Gerry Dulac, I think about golf and I think about the Steelers. So you said you can't have a favorite player, but of course there's a lot of players you've gotten along with over the years. If you were making up a dream foursome of 3 other Steelers to join you, who would you take?
There's probably some that I've played with, but Dick LeBeau would be right there. Keith Butler, their former defensive coordinator, who I played with a number of times up here at camp. They would probably be in it, but I've played with Bruce Arians. A number of guys. I've played with Ben, Gary Anderson, going way back. Mike Wagner's one of my all-time favorites. Played a number of rounds with him and L.C. Greenwood. So my dream foursome would be, LeBeau would be in there. Maybe Arians, because he's just the greatest. And I'd sneak Arnold Palmer in there. I'll throw Ben in there. But back to the 70 teams, the 4 Super Bowl teams. I wasn't around them enough to know those guys and play with them. But I will tell you, I played with Chuck Knowles, so I can't forget Chuck. So he would be my fourth.
Well, they're all involved. And if you can sneak Arnold Palmer in, I'm sure it's perfectly fine.
Right.
Nobody will have an issue. Looking ahead to
Ken Wisenhunt, too. I forgot Wiz. See, I could go on and on.
Any idea
how much time do we have?
Any idea who's the best player on today's
team? Well, Aaron Rodgers is a good player. Chris Boswell played the other day. I won't want to give away his secrets, but he played 36 holes at a championship course and shot 78, 79. Um, he's obviously pretty good. Like I said, I know Rodgers is a good player. Last year, Patrick Peterson, very good player. Um, Terrell Austin loves to play, but he's not a single-digit handicap. I play with him frequently as well. Um, and so I'd probably have to say Boz unless I'm forgetting somebody.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
It's not Christian Kuntz, I'll tell you that. God bless him. He loves to play too. Ben Skoranek was with them the other day when they went out. Rodgers and Boz and Ben Skoranek. They went out and played. And what that shows you is the people who wonder what Aaron Rodgers is like. All the guys talk about he's just one of the guys, and there's a perfect example.
Yeah.
Here's the 4-time MVP going on to play golf with a kicker and a wide receiver who's a special teams player. It's kind of guy,
totally
kind
agree.
of guy he's been, and it's been nice to see.
I think one of the first things he said was get to know me first.
That's exactly right, and that's exactly the way. That's the way he has been with these guys. His dorm room has been an open door. Guys come in and out. He's talked about it frequently, and he says how much he loves being here because in his 20 years, 18 of which were at Green Bay, there's this misconception that the Packers go away to training camp. They don't go away to training camp. It's the equivalent of they stay at St. Norbert's University, and it would be the equivalent of staying right here, and the Packers' regular team facility is right there. It's just across the street. That's not going away. This is going away, 40 miles away from the south side, and he loves it. He's never had that in 20 years, and so it's new for him, and he's enjoying it.
Well, I mean, I had that experience. I took my son here with me today, and we kept getting further and further away from the city. And he says, "What are we doing?" I said, "This is kind of the point,
right?
We're trying to get away from the city, not for the fans, but for the players."
And it's a beautiful setting too in the Laurel Highlands.
Absolutely, absolutely. So after the first week at camp, what are some things that have stood out to you about this team that may have caught you by surprise?
Well, the one thing I've learned a long time ago was the first week at camp, especially now with the new NFL rules, they have this 4-day acclimation period, they call it. And so basically what it is it's an extension of OTAs. They're not allowed to wear pads. It's a little bit more involved, but all the coaches are doing for those 4 days is seeing who knows the playbook. Okay, maybe with a wide receiver, you can see him make a spectacular catch, but it's who understands the playbook, who's in the right spots at the right time. Mm-hmm. The coaches do not, and even Mike Tomlin said last week, he said training camp starts for Rio on Tuesday. Well, unfortunately, it got rained out, so it started yesterday, and that's the day they put on the pads. So I learned a long time ago not to evaluate anybody, just like the coaches, until the pads go on. So it's only been 2 days. I don't think there's any question. It's very apparent that Aaron Rodgers is developing and wants to, but is developing a connection with DK Metcalf, who is his roommate here at St. Vincent College. That's apparent. Every second pass, certainly every third pass he throws is at DK Metcalf. But it's a very spirited, competitive 2 days, and they weren't in pads today, but they will be tomorrow. But you can see the defensive backs. They brought in Darius Slay. They trade for Jalen Ramsey. Joey Porter's already here. Those are 3 physical cornerbacks, and they're not backing off out there. And that's what stands out to me. The kind of, I don't want to call it physical because it is, but it's the competitive nature of those secondary guys against DK Metcalf, in particular, Jonnu Smith, who got into a couple tussles today with Juan Thornhill, who wants to show that he's not going to back down. That's another new addition. That's what has stood out to me, other than just watching Aaron Rodgers throw the football. I have always said Aaron Rodgers is the greatest thrower of the football I have ever seen. And his ability to release the ball, not only so quickly, but the velocity he has on it, as the coaches say, the RPMs he has, the spin rate, it's impressive to see. I've seen it for years, but when you see it in person at training camp and all the different throws, it really is something to see.
I agree. From a competitiveness perspective, I had a chance to watch practice today. I saw the same things you did. Do you feel that's different than past years? Do you feel that's a whole new lift? Because I saw a lot of it coming from those newer players that you referenced.
They had a little bit of that last year with Russell Wilson, because you're talking about a guy who's won one Super Bowl, probably should have won 2, has a number of passing marks in the league. Likely Hall of Famer, not a first ballot, but he should get into the Hall of Fame. So there was that anticipation last year with Russell Wilson. But Russell Wilson is not Aaron Rodgers, a 4-time MVP. Like Russell, he's only won 1 Super Bowl, but 7th all-time leading passer. I think he's 5th ready to pass Ben Roethlisberger for I believe, the most attempts in the league. I think he's 4th or 5th in touchdowns. He's going to pass his old teammate Brett Favre here soon, once the regular season starts. So when you have an Aaron Rodgers in camp, and then you trade for a DK Metcalf, who was the most coveted receiver in the draft 6 years ago, when you have those types of players come in, it's an entirely different feeling. And of all the changes they made each of the previous 2 seasons, it's nothing like this. And their commitment to wanting to win now, I mean, win a playoff game and take steps back to where they feel they should be. They're all in this year. They may not use that expression, but there's no question that's what they are.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's an exciting year. I think it's an exciting year to be here. Last question for me. So looking forward to this season, what do you think is going to be the key to the Steelers taking that next leap?
Well, their defense should be, I mean, because now that they've fixed up the back end and they've added depth, their linebacker crew is as good and as deep as it's ever been. And the secondary, the same. You have 3 guys going to be on the field all the time: Jalen Ramsey, Darius Slay, and Joey Porter. They really like Deshaun Elliott. So those 4 guys are going to be on the field all the time, 3 cornerbacks, and they'll move Jalen Ramsey around. So the defense should be very good, and they've spent a lot of money. They already had, and they've done it even more so. They have 5 defensive players who count more than $17.5 million against the cap. No other team in the league has more than 3 players who count more than, and the only one is Green Bay, more than 3 players who count $17.5 million. They've invested a lot of money. This idea that the Steelers in the past were frugal or cheap, that is certainly not the case anymore. I think once they got Jalen Ramsey and added Jonnu Smith in that trade, I didn't know that if they were appreciably better than last year, because you got your fingers crossed with Aaron Rodgers. He's 41 years old, won only 5 games last year, but that's the New York Jets. They're not the Pittsburgh Steelers. But once they made that trade, I thought then they took a necessary step with 2 players to get better. So people forget they were 10-3 last year at one point, and the offense in those previous 8 games with Russell Wilson, they were averaging almost 29 points a game. And they were challenging, and they had first place against the Baltimore Ravens team, in which Lamar Jackson was having one of his best seasons, and yet they were in first place for a while. Mm-hmm. So they're not that far away, but of course they had their December collapse. To answer your question, I think they're a better team than they were last year. I did not think that before this most recent trade. So if they were 10-7 last year, I'll give them 11-6.
Okay.
We'll see what happens.
Well, I appreciate that, Gerry. I really appreciate your time. This has been very informative, especially with your history with U.S. Steel and the company in the Mon Valley. So thanks again to Gerry Dulac from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Another episode of Steel Stories from U.S. Steel. Thank you.
Steel Stories is brought to you by U.S. Steel. The views expressed by guests are their own and not necessarily the views of U.S. Steel. To find out more about our sustainable steel solutions, visit www.ussteel.com. Search for US Steel in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to hit subscribe so you never miss a future episode. On behalf of the team here at US Steel, thanks for listening.